And I am completely reformed now. I think in becoming a therapist, it really helped me see that I didn't like being around humans because I was afraid of them. I didn't really understand them. And now I think I understand them very well, which is that we are all on a journey and we all feel like we're not good enough and we all want for more. It's just like we're having the same experience, but we're not talking about it.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. If you want the life and career that you dream of, you need more than lofty goals. Talking with our guest today made me think about the quote by James Clear, the author of the popular book Atomic Habits. He says, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." Whether on an individual level or within a massive hospital system, our goals are successfully achieved when we can set up systems that support the change in actions and behaviors. Crystal Stokes helps establish the right systems to achieve those goals for veterinary professionals. How did Crystal get there? Well, Crystal's journey into veterinary medicine was met with some huge personal challenges that turned her world upside down, but led to vital discoveries that she now can help others in vet med discover for themselves. She is able to combine her data and systems thinking with understanding human behavior and human emotions. But getting to that emotional side was not easy for her. So let's get to the conversation with Crystal Stokes. When did you know you were interested in working with animals?
Oh, I was born with it. I'm one of those people. As a kid, I was obsessed with all things nature and science. And even as a very little kid, it's like 3 years or so of age, because I remember we moved to a new location. I remember being on the carpet and playing with a cricket and accidentally popped his little head off. And being just mortified that I'd killed this cricket, to the point where my dad got a matchbox and we wrapped him in tissue and had a little burial for this cricket. So I had that level of empathy and that interest in death and what kept things alive. And I was very attracted to the vet med industry my whole childhood.
I've heard a story quite like that. I'm assuming that kind of prompted your decision to start focusing in biology. And I saw that you went to NC State for your undergrad and specialized in wildlife biology. I was looking at some of the cool experiences you did during that, worked with all sorts of animals. But what did you decide? You said you were interested in working with the animals. Were you thinking a vet track, or you're just kind of curious to learn about different things with animals? What were your thoughts going into undergrad?
Yeah, I always thought I'd be a veterinarian, actually. So I think it was middle school, or it could have been elementary. They have us fill out those papers of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then they show them to you in high school. And on mine, it had veterinarian, paleontologist, and archaeologist. So I was a super nerd. You know what I mean? You could see me alone, like trying to dig up dinosaur bones. That was me. So I was always attracted to it. And at NC State, I was also pre-vet, pre-med. Wildlife conservation was the perfect major for me. I was mostly men in that major, just a lot of dudes hanging out in the woods. I felt very at home with that cohort of people. And we had great internships working with all different types of wildlife. So it was a really good fit for me as an undergraduate.
Okay, so I'm curious. You said it's a bunch of boys in the woods, and you said it felt like home. Did you grow up with like a bunch of boys, brothers, or?
I was primarily raised by my dad in the woods. We grew up kind of in the middle of nowhere. It was a large plantation with no neighbors. And I was always kind of a daddy's girl and just comfortable in that environment with fewer words, more trees. And it was a really good fit.
And it's so funny that you're gonna end up being a psychotherapist, and it's perfect. I grew up with a bunch of boys. I didn't know if that was something to do with it.
That's so funny. I have a brother as well, but we didn't grow up together as our parents divorced. So my sister and brother grew up with my mom like 6 hours away, but we're very, very close. And I love hanging out with him too.
Oh, wow. So you were thinking about vet, and I've spilled the beans. That's not quite the direction you went, but while you were at school, you were still exploring that. So I saw that you took jobs doing veterinary assistant, veterinary technician work. So what was that experience for you? Because it sounds like you were a full-time student potentially and doing that at the same time. So that seems like a lot.
I mean, like many people attracted to the veterinary profession, I'm a hardcore overworker and have some perfectionistic tendencies. When I was in school, I didn't have financial support or backing, and I did start at NC State out of state. I was kind of one of those kids, I don't know what I was thinking looking back. I got into NC State and Virginia Tech, and I was from Virginia, so I could have just gone to Virginia Tech, but I was obsessed with NC State. I'm like, no, I want to go to their vet school, so I'm going to go there undergraduate. And, the student debt part, it really did bother me. So I was dedicated to working full time while being in school just to pay down as much as I could or acquire as little debt as I could. I had jobs in addition to my vet med work, but I did work as a veterinary technician for 3 years. And the first 2 years of that were in companion animal, which I loved. I started from the kennels and worked your way up and had a blast. It was a privately owned clinic, and it was a great place to cut my teeth. But I also wanted more, for sure. You kind of, find the ceiling rather quickly in companion animal. And so to pursue more skill and just experience, I then took an overnight position as an ER tech. And I thought this was brilliant because I was going to work many more hours and get a lot more experience and even get paid more per hour. And I figured I would do that. And then, of course, be in school all day and sleep never, just drink a lot of caffeine. And I was able to keep that up for quite a long time because at that age, our bodies can take a lot of abuse. But the part I did not account for or prepare for was economic euthanasia. We just didn't see much of that in the companion animal GP space. At that level, I could deal with it. But in an emergency overnight, there was just so much economic euthanasia, and we didn't have like training or support around that. We didn't debrief after it would happen. It was just sort of like, yeah, that was euthanized, move on. Boom, 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 like a mill. And at that age, I was also not good at asking for support. I didn't ever think to tell anybody what I was thinking, that this is wrecking my soul. Like I couldn't figure out how to be in that space and do that work while still upholding my ethical beliefs of trying to save animals. It was not working for me, and I didn't have a way to work through that. And the message in my head was just, kid, if you don't have what it takes to do this, you can't be a vet. And so there was a certain point, I remember my last cat, it was a gray cat that had a broken leg. So it was completely fixable. And the pet parent just could not afford the bill. And so they chose to euthanize. And I remember standing there thinking I should steal the cat because we weren't allowed to intervene and we couldn't. I was like, I'm just going to steal it and run to my car and peel out of here. It'd be my last day. But I didn't. I just stood by and we euthanized it and then I quit. And that was my last day in any kind of technical role in veterinary medicine. So that was the beginning of a quarter life crisis that lasted quite a long time because I had no backup plan.
It's such a good observation and point, though, around having more conversations around these hard things. I think this has come up in several of my conversations on the podcast. But I mean, as you're talking, I'm sure other people are thinking about several deaths and euthanasias that come to their mind and that we still remember after a decade. And so it really does impact us because this is why we went into veterinary medicine, is we did have a heart for these animals. And not only personally being able to have compensation skills or these skills to be able to handle this, but also, as we are the older ones in the industry, to have those communication skills to open that up, to say, how is everybody feeling? I remember one conversation we talked about even allowing for people to not be part of the case. Like if they needed to walk away from the case and have somebody else come in, it was an open conversation to make sure that that was okay. And so there's a lot of opportunity there, I think, to improve, probably still today, to have more of those types of conversations, especially internally, to support each other. But you mentioned this was the start of a quarter life crisis because you didn't have a backup plan. So what did you start to do to figure out, okay, so that not so much. All right, now what?
So I finished my degree and just kind of stood there going, now what? I chose to go, I was all prepared for everything I'd done was in preparation for vet school. So I just flight deviation and said, all right, med school, close enough. Love medicine. I knew that. And I don't get as emotional when it comes to humans dying, not to be, and I know that might sound callous, but it didn't, I wasn't as scared of that. We don't euthanize humans for economic reasons here in the United States. So that's comforting. That was comforting to me back then. Went that path, discovered that's not the right path for me. Spun my tires, thought about physical therapy. Maybe I want to be a physical therapy DPT. Explored that. I was working as a physical therapy technician. So I was in that for a while. in parallel working as a personal trainer, and just nothing felt right. I really was lost. And all of the kind of trying to fix it work that I was doing of just try this degree or, take your MCAT, go all these things that my old self thought would work were just not, right? It's just like all I have is a hammer. I'm just hammering away. I have no other tools in the toolkit. And that brought me to my knees. Like I've reached a point of just surrender of I don't know what to do anymore. I just got to put my hands up. And I came from a family that thought therapy was for weak people or crazy people. So I had that narrative in my head. But I thought, I've exhausted all my other options of what I think works. I don't have any career options that sound good to me at all. Nothing's appealing. I'm going to go and try out the therapy thing. And oh my gosh, it was not natural for me at all to enter into therapy. It was very hard for me to talk about my feelings or to be introspective or to slow down. I found it quite excruciating. But through the course of therapy, I felt like I went from Pinocchio, like this wooden object, to a real boy, like something of flesh and blood. And I could finally feel my heart and like this inner part of me that I like lost since childhood. Like I kind of reconnected with this sense of purpose and hope and belief and ability. And I remember it was probably about 3 years of therapy before I came out the other side. And I remember sitting there with my therapist and I said to her, Deborah, I finally know what I want to be when I grow up. She's like, what is that? Because she was a very non-directive therapist. She was never really pushing or overly guiding in any way. She was really just helping me unfold. The 3 years of me unfolding led to that. And I said, well, I want to be a therapist. She goes, I was like, yes, because I need to know all the stuff behind the curtain that you've been doing. Like I was so enchanted with the magic. It felt like magic. It was so different than hard science, which is just so, to me, so obvious to see why it works or doesn't work. To me, this process felt mysterious and I love a good mystery. So I wanted to know. I wanted to know the science. I wanted to know why and how. And that's what led me to Palo Alto for grad school. I only applied to one school. It was the one she suggested. And I just went. It was that fast. It was a hell yes decision.
So you were confident, you went in to study more on therapy, and I know there's multiple types of therapy, which maybe we'll get into if you want to explain a little bit more. But once you were there and you were there to kind of figure out this mystery behind the magic of this transformation, what did you discover?
That's the part I'm often embarrassed to admit. My program was a master's program. And I went in with the attitude in a way that I brought to NC State, which is show me the data, teach me the steps, I'll write the reports, I'll do the work. And I was good at that part. And I'm there with a cohort of people who they pretty much all had studied liberal art. So we had different skill sets. I was kind of a little bit of a black sheep in the cohort. And what happened was some of these courses were like I described, like there's the science and the evidence and check the boxes and learn the skills and you're done. But there were many other courses that were experiential, like creative expression. And I completely rebelled. My first year and a half, it was a 3-year program. I just couldn't get my head around participating. They want you to like in class experience and feel and have emotions. And I was like, God damn it. No. I was like, this is bullshit. I just want to know the theory. I don't want to do creative expression. This is a waste of my time. I was pissed. I was so angry. And they would just stand back and be like, oh, Crystal, you're going to have to do it because we were going to be asking your clients to do it. And I was like, oh, I was just rebelling because I didn't want to let go. I think there's something about control and letting go and being seen in front of a whole group. Like what might come out if I actually participated in this experience was scary to me and very humbling. But after a year and a half, as the teachers joked, they broke the horse that is Crystal, and I finally surrendered into the process. And it was wonderful to really just join the fellow liberal arts people in the feeling side of experience. So there's a one thing to get the theory and get the data, and there's another thing to feel it and to drop in. And I think that's the skill that I really needed. And it changed me as a human. Like from a DNA perspective, I felt different, even more so, like a whole nother level in learning those practices. And so I came out with a real different view on the world and how I wanted to engage with people that would be clients as well as just with my life in general. It was massively transformative. I got way more than I paid for that tuition bill.
Well, and I can't help but think that a lot of people in veterinary medicine are probably very similar in the way that they think to original Crystal, right? And you still work with veterinary professionals today on these things. So I'm very curious, is that accurate? Do a lot of people in veterinary medicine come at things like this of I'm a problem solver, I'm science-based, let's just fix it and go home? Um,
Okay.
and what do you have to kind of work through with others? Like, it's one thing, I'm sure, like, it may be the hardest part, maybe working on yourself, but then to have to help other people through this, what are some of the things that you see in the veterinary profession?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the reasons I love working the veterinary profession so much is that I 100% get it. Like I'm still the OG. I still feel all the same things. That thought process is still the strongest groove neuro pathway in my brain. So when I sit with veterinary professionals, I really appreciate that about them. I think that skill set is so amazing. Like veterinarians, I've worked across all spectrums of industry outside of veterinary medicine as well. I came back to veterinary medicine. Now it's my home. It's where I spend all of my time. All the work I do is vet med. And I can say, I don't mean to make other professions feel less than, but I think veterinary medicine is the best. I think people that have the skill set of being able to work on multiple species, it's just phenomenal. So I always like to start with saying the way we approach problem is great. Be proud of that initial response because it often does work. When I work with veterinary professionals, I generally am coming in to address people issues, people challenges, especially retention. Hospital leaders that have people leaving, how do we help people stay? Wanting to have their team feel well, but also perform well, right? Profit and people. Those are big conversations also around resolving conflict that, if you have a big group of people, there are going to be plenty of conflict. That's just the nature of humans. So helping leadership really design, implement best practices to best support their people to get the most out of it and to have a life and a career that you really love. So when I enter into these spaces and we're working with humans, I want to take their knowledge of the science and the approach that we knee-jerk go to and just add to it. Like it's a good starting point, but if you find you're hitting a wall, which we often do, now we just need to learn just additional skill sets. And I remind veterinary professionals that you all are incredible learners. You can learn anything. Look at all the things you've already learned. So I'm just here to teach you additional strategies. They might be outside of your comfort zone, but once you get some practice under your belt, they can feel just as comfortable as your hard science skill sets.
Well, and you mentioned that you've worked across industries. So I want to go back to those because I think it's also really helpful to learn from other industries too. And especially for you, it looked like you really got into the entrepreneurship side of things too. You were working with like the global startup incubator in Santa Barbara. I was just like, oh, this is so cool. So how did going from mastering in counseling and then now starting to work in like a startup, incubators, entrepreneurship, like how did that all come into it as well?
Well, I think this is a through line of what drew us together as we both have a natural love for entrepreneurship. And I think that those of us that have been bitten by that bug have a colorful life. Even though it sometimes is a bumpy ride, it sure is fun. So when I graduated with my master's, I did enter in kind of cookie cutter working as a psychotherapist, just pure. And then I moved to Vienna for a few years, which is where I got more into the startup scene, simply because in Vienna, I couldn't work as a therapist legally. The space of expats happened to be around entrepreneurship. So I started coaching in that space just to offer kind of like performance coaching, burnout coaching, things like that, team development coaching, leveraging skills I had as a therapist. And also I had done some additional training around coaching. So I was playing with that in Vienna. And then when I came back to California, I started kind of working in a hybrid way, partly as a psychotherapist, and I specialized in anxiety disorders and PTSD. I love working with military and first responders, as well as teenagers. I have a very special affection for teenagers. I think it's an amazing stage of life. And then I shifted into a position of director of operations. And some of the positions I've had through time, it's been a bit hodgepodge, but I've been sought out for operational roles. I think that my mind is very systems thinking. I love systems. And I believe that many challenges that we face are not really an individual challenge. They're really a system issue. So even if you have that one employee as an, in quotes, bad employee, I look at the system around that person and say, well, what were the 14 steps before this incident that went wrong that led to us here today thinking this is a bad employee? So those roles really helped color my perspective around like the work I do in veterinary medicine of how do we approach challenges? How do we approach our goals? And looking at it from a place of curiosity and looking at the system as a whole. So trying to take those things apart. I guess I'll pause there because it's kind of like the journey is a little bit messy how I bounced around between working for organizations and that kind of therapy and operational capacity, but then also starting my own business. I think like a lot of entrepreneurs, we have an internal hunger to do it our way. And I could see things in the systems I was working in, the companies I worked for that I thought, ooh, if I could do it my way, I would do this instead. And so on the side, I was developing my own practice. It was a hybrid between coaching and therapy, which eventually did become the company that exists today, full-time, Full Circle Lab. But it was a slow process.
Yeah. Before we go too much further, I mentioned that I know that there's different types of counseling and therapy. And I mean, my father is a child psychiatrist, and I still don't know all the different levels and types. And so do you mind defining what a psychotherapist is? Because that term sounds really funny.
I know it does. So really, it does. It sounds, yes, it is a weird word. So I think that oftentimes where we get confused, like as a lay population, before I was a therapist, I did not know the difference between a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a psychotherapist. And of course, there are also social workers. We'll segment that out. So a psychotherapist has a master's degree, whereas a psychologist would have a PhD or a PsyD. And then a psychiatrist would have an MD, and a psychiatrist can prescribe medication. A psychologist, the difference between a psychologist and a psychotherapist is a psychologist is able to perform psychological testing. So if you have a kid that it's often for children when you're concerned about certain behaviors and you want to flesh out what's actually happening here. Is it ADHD or is it something else? You might send them to a psychologist for that type of testing. Both psychologists and psychotherapists can provide counseling and therapy. So as a psychotherapist, the bulk of my work would be to sit down with clients one-on-one or in group and help discover their diagnosis, put together a treatment plan, implement that treatment plan, and then assist them with discharge and their next steps, which is often where a social worker will come in and help connect them with resources in the community. They can do that earlier on in the process too, throughout the course of therapy if they need to be in something like AA while also in therapy. So we all often work together and overlap. And the company I've been in will have all different types of team members collaborating together on cases.
I actually really love that collaborative approach to health, because this really is, it comes down to health in general. I can't help but remember, I'm trying to remember the actual phrase. You can put it in here when I get it. But Brene Brown, it's not an original Brene Brown, but she tended to quote it a lot. And it was something about that we fall to the level of our systems. And you were talking about being able to put in, working system wise or thinking that way and being able to implement that. And so again, I just love this kind of crossover between a more analytical science approach, but then also being able to get down to the heart of the matter. I love that you're able to do that, because I think back to that phrase of we fall to the level of our systems. If we don't have a good system in place, which system is not really a warm, fuzzy word, right? But if we do not have the systems in place, that it's really hard to use these skills that we develop, or we learn these more warm, fuzzy things that are extremely critical, but they're not going to succeed if you don't have those systems in place. And I don't know if we think about that so much. I think, we're sent off to conferences to learn things and rapid fire 50-minute talks, and then we go home and what do we implement? Maybe a couple of facts that we wrote down, and maybe change a drug or something. But, really, we don't come back to a great system necessarily to implement these things that we learn. So what are some, if you have examples or, How does that work? How do we bring in the understanding ourselves, understanding culture, and communicating better? How do we put all of that into a system where it can be successful?
Oh, I love this question so much. If I had glasses, I'd put them on right now so I could be extra nerdy with you. I'll describe the system I often use when I enter into a practice, because I think this helps pull back the veil like I wanted to do with my therapist. So, first of all, I'll say that when companies ask me to come in, I have found, I'd say 99.99% of the time, so it's leadership that contacts me, the owners, or it could be people in a C-suite level and then around the regional level as well. They have so much heart and they want so badly for their company to be successful and for their people to be happy, first and foremost. And they come to me saying, things are not going well in a variety of ways, and we just need to figure this out. We're kind of in over our head. I fit a part of the pie chart that's often missing in a team like that, where they have so much skill and talent on that team, but there's this one thing, it's like right here, the center of the forehead that you can't see, and they want to figure it out. So what I do is I enter in, typical old crystal style, data. I want to see your data. So we look at retention data over the years. If they have survey data, some companies do surveys naturally. I'll take that survey data. If they don't have survey data, I'll help them put that together to perform that to find out. So that's usually employee satisfaction or ENPS data, a great way to get the pulse of what's going on with the team. Then we crunch that together. I take all the surveys and the retention data, I look through it, and I formulate a bunch of questions like, I wonder what's going on with that. I would like to ask the team a question about that. So I put together a list of interview questions based on the data, and then I fly in and I meet with a group. We just pick out a subsection of their team that I will interview, and I sit down, confidential interviews, so people feel safe to spill all the beans. And in these interviews I'm not just there to hear complaints. I am there to elicit solutions. I want to know, if I was sitting with you, Megan, and you were talking about a challenge you're having in your company, I'd say, awesome, thank you for identifying that. If I gave you the magic wand of all the power and you could create the solutions, tell me what you would create. How would it work? How would we build it? I want to elicit your buy-in and being a part of that change. Already, I want your gears to be turning. I then condense all that into a massive report that I then try to make as small as possible. I try to bottom line it, and I bring that back to leadership. And then we discuss what initiatives need to be created. I'll list my suggested initiatives in that report. That to me is super fun, like to map out what I think would help and put together a treatment plan for the hospital. But sitting down with leadership to see resource-wise, timeline-wise, budget-wise, human capital-wise, what can we actually do? And we want to start off with whatever system-wide change. I always look for the linchpin. If we could do one that would have a ripple effect throughout the organization that might make the other ones easier down the road, what would that be? And based on those reports and interviews and surveys, we can usually identify what that is, the biggest pain point within the company. Sometimes it's around efficiency. Like you might come in, I had an organization that was larger, many hospitals across the region, and a big part of what was causing their pain was they just did not have clear or effective communication pathways. So even though they were working so hard and trying so hard, there was always a sense of chaos, a sense of dis-ease in the team because they weren't all on the same page. And as soon as we were able to figure out the technology piece, as well as who does what, who sits in what seat, and what is their responsibility to making that engine run, and then when we're communicating, how do we word it? What's the flavor of it culture-wise? So there's the soft and the hard put together. That was a huge change for that particular company. Other companies, it might be something that falls more on the softer skill side that's cultural, where people say, we just don't feel safe here. There's something about how we communicate with leadership or how we communicate on the floor, that there's a sense of tribalism or a sense of some kind of toxicity that word is often used around like a buzzword. And so getting to the heart of that, of what would it take to change that narrative and have people feel united, or to feel that they're joining together against a problem instead of being against each other, like they are the problem. So the systems that we build are very unique to the hospital. I don't do anything cookie cutter at all, except maybe always offer Slack. I love Slack. So when teams don't have a good communication system, that's probably one of the things that I will often recommend as a go-to to fill the gap.
That's interesting on the Slack piece, because I guess probably a lot of hospitals don't think about using something like that. Now, maybe it might work a little bit better for a bigger organization, But the one thing that you seem to recommend across the board, let's dive in a little bit there. What is it about, like, I want to be a scientist here too. What problem are you solving with the Slack, and how does it make that problem a lot easier for a veterinary team?
Great question. So I was introduced to Slack when I was on a startup team. And then I also learned to implement Slack in other companies. So I brought it into a psychotherapy company where I'll tell you, us therapists don't tend to like technology at all. So getting all these therapists on board, if you can do that, anybody can do it. For sure, hard science people can. What I love about Slack, well, I'll back up. I'll say the problem that we're solving is that so often in hospitals, like anybody listening to this podcast, raise your hand if you've experienced this. They often have like many different modes of communication. Some things are emailed, some things are in Teams, some things are done by smoke signals, some things are texted, sometimes they call you, and you're like, I don't know how to keep track of all this. My email inbox is overflowing. I am a big fan of not using email as much as possible. If you're getting texts on your private cell phone, that can be trouble for work-life balance and having boundaries. And it's just hard to locate things. My biggest challenge with that type of communication is, where do we go to find the most relevant information? If there was an important update and I can't remember what it was about a new process, well, then I'm not going to do the new process. And then you're going to get mad at me as an employee because I didn't follow through, but it was actually because the communication pathway sucked. So to me, we're trying to streamline communication to make it very easy for new information, urgent information, important information to flow through the hospital, and for it to go both ways, for people on boots on the ground to have a very clear avenue to manage up and to speak up the appropriate pathways. So the coolest thing about Slack is that it's a place that I think it kind of replaces text messaging and can also be a place to do like shorter emails, things that don't need to be very long can also go into Slack. You can also attach things like documents or, PDFs, all that stuff can live there. You can create channels that are specific to certain groups. Like one channel can be for only your lead technicians. Another channel can be for only veterinarians. Another channel is for upper level leadership, like medical director, hospital administrator, and so on. And you can clarify who gets what messages based on those channels. You can set up reminders. You can pin things so you can find them later. It's I don't even use all the functions on Slack. Like it's over my head, but even the basic functionings I find just so helpful from a communication standpoint.
Yes, and I do know you can have Slack on your phone, but I also like the ability to have it that there's some separation of it as well. So you know that to get important business information, this is the place to go. And when I go home for the day, then Slack stays at work and I can be at home. I think that's really important too. The other thing that I really like about this is something that I have seen across multiple companies that I've worked with is the importance of the communication from leadership. It's really, really important that be often and consistent, because I feel like when there's a disconnect with your leadership team, I always say this, right? If you aren't giving people a full story, human beings do not like gaps. And so we will fill in the gaps and we will usually do it at the worst case scenario, right? And so when the leadership is able to communicate, and I mean tippy top leadership too, I'm like, especially if you're talking about big corporations, I just think that's so important. And what do you think? Because I know you have done a lot with leadership coaching as well as full team reducing turnover and things like that. But when it comes to leadership, what do you feel is that part in this overall puzzle?
Yeah, I will answer that. And but before I do that, I'm going to go back to the Slack comment because I really like what you said around the use of some kind of these technologies. Like for my team, I have a team of coaches that are a mixture of DVMs who are certified coaches and social workers who are veterinary social workers. We keep all of our stuff on Slack. And I recommend to all of them, set your notifications or do not disturb based on your need. We have agreed upon turnover in communication, like how fast we're supposed to respond, and we agree on that. But otherwise, I want them to have those healthy boundaries around how they engage with their technology. And Slack, you can have either on your desktop or your phone or both. I have it on both. But I can turn off my notifications on Slack. So I only see it if I proactively open the app. And that's really nice. I think it's important to have a good boundary with our technology, especially in this day and age of overwhelm. And then your comment on leadership, I just want to say, hell yeah. It is so important because you're right. Humans have a negativity bias. Even me, I would say, I wish I didn't have it. I thought once I learned about the negativity bias, I could overcome it. But it's just how we're wired. When we don't have information or when we're scanning our environment, we'll tend to notice what's wrong, or we'll tend to make up things that in order to protect ourselves. That's really about protection and identifying danger and being ready for it. So leadership the way I like to describe it when I'm talking to leadership is you need to control the optics and the narrative of what's happening in your practice. So tell the story. Like, your communication is a continuous reminder of the mission and the purpose and the values of your organization. You should be living by them every single day. Your values define how you make decisions in your company, reminding people that they are appreciated, celebrating wins. When things go wrong, having a pathway to talk about it. So you want people to have this consistent, like you said, consistent and frequent communication with leadership. And it should be mostly positive, that they are just in touch, keeping you up to date on what's happening, giving positive feedback, so that when they do contact you about something that went wrong, or, you all have to manage a difficult situation, you already have that rapport built. You already have a foundation of trust built, and it's just another conversation. So you're used to positive and negative all being a part of the mix, and it feels natural. If the only time your staff hears from leadership is when they've messed up, in quotes, what do you think that relationship's going to be like? They're going to flinch every time they see your name pop up on Slack or email or on the phone. They're going to want to avoid you. So if you want people to have a open flow and relationship with leadership, you have to cultivate that continuously. It's like a garden. You got to prune it and weed it and fertilize it and water it.
Yeah. And I mentioned, I think it's important for the tippy top, but I also think it's important all the way down. And the better the tippy top is, I think makes it all the easier going down in general, because now I have things I can communicate. Now I know information that I can have conversations with my team, and not just like, yeah, you know as much as I do. That's not helpful. But I think all elements of leadership, even if you are lead technician or veterinarian, all of those things are important to also implement those communication skills as well.
I'm dying to piggyback on that and say yes, because so much of what my coaches work on, the language I use a lot when I enter into companies is Full Circle Lab. My team is here to help bridge the gap between leadership and people boots on the ground. Because very often what I hear during my interviews of boots on the ground staff is that they don't care. There's no point in even communicating with them. It never goes anywhere. They say they're going to do something, then they don't do it. Every hospital, I hear this kind of refrain. And I want to remind staff that it's not intentional. It truly isn't. It's usually because we don't have a good system in place, or leadership is truly overwhelmed. I often see people in leadership roles wearing 14 hats. And I think, oh my goodness, so we need a lot of systems for them to succeed. So in the bridging of the gap, this is where my coaches often come in, and they will work with staff that are boots on the ground and help develop leadership skills. And I think anybody can use leadership skills, whether you are a newbie tech or a seasoned medical director, learning communication skills, learning to deal with conflict, learning to deal with our own emotions, learning interpersonal skills, learning delegation, all of that. So when our coaches are talking to team members, we are often working on communication up and managing up. Very often team members are shut down and they don't want to speak up. They feel like either they're not comfortable with it, or they feel like it's not going to get the result they want. So we do baby steps, like mini exposures of getting them more and more comfortable with putting their hand up and having a voice. And we always advocate for not just complaining, but providing the solution that you want to be a part of. You'll get better results that way. And that has been really transformative when you have the leadership and staff kind of reaching towards each other and finally holding hands. And you see that synergy of what happens when they're really starting to align and get on the same page. It is just so rewarding. It definitely fills my cup with the work that we do.
Yeah, and all of those things that you're doing is building up trust within the whole organization, and that is so vital. And I just wanted to bring back something that you kind of started with, as well as when you're brought in, it's because the leadership cares. It's because they want their people to be happy. They want to have everyone be successful. So to you assume a positive intent that yes, they may be wearing too many hats. They may be human and have a lot of imperfections, but most of the time it sounds like that they are really doing this because they want to do something better. They really care about their people and the company. And so that is very encouraging, I hope, for everyone to hear that and to participate in, yeah, they may be some challenging steps. They may be uncomfortable and you may have to build trust, but the fact that it's totally worth the effort into doing it.
It's so true. I often see too, when I meet with people in leadership roles, like say hospital administrator, medical directors and whatnot, if I ask them, were you provided any specific training on how to manage and or lead? They're two different things. And they'll say, no. Super common. It's not unique to veterinary medicine. There's the Peter principle, which refers to the situation where we are promoted to our level of incompetence. So if you're a very competent veterinarian, then you get promoted to a medical director and it's like, oh, now I'm out of my comfort zone. There are things I'm supposed to do like compliance. What do I need to do for the compliance? What is that? I'm supposed to now manage certain situations with my team. I was their peer and now I'm not. How do I navigate that? And the same thing for like a hospital administrator or practice manager who was formerly a technician. It's a whole different skill set. So that's also where we come in and provide that leadership development in terms of some of those skill sets that you really do need in order to succeed and developing your own style. I think too, giving people permission to not think there's some cookie cutter right way. Oh my gosh, please. That's a sure way to have imposter syndrome forever. But finding your strategy of leadership and management that is effective. So we do need to have the data that shows that it's working, but you can do it many different ways.
Ooh, I love that. Where again, back to the having ownership over the solutions is that this is not just something we pulled out of a book or, it is us. This is representing us and our personal goals and who we are. And so therefore those solutions need to be as custom as those things are as well. And I know we're short on time. So you also started a podcast a few months before Vet Life Reimagined. So in January 2022, you started Vet Med Wellness and Leadership Podcast. And I was scrolling through the guests and you have tons of amazing guests. So not only do you talk to be top leadership, I don't know why I keep using that term, to people boots on the ground, to all these wonderful, intelligent people across the profession. So what is something that comes to mind that you, from all these conversations that you've had, is something that you feel is really relevant today for veterinary medicine that you would want to give as words of wisdom?
Oh my gosh, that's such a big question. I'm glad you didn't give me that ahead of time because I probably would not have slept.
Oh, no.
And I will say that one of my next most amazing guests will be you, which is long overdue. I'm very excited to have you on. Yes. So of all the podcasts I've done, if I was going to extract something out, I think it's to have the difficult conversations. What I really love on my podcast is the level of authenticity. People come on there and they talk about their journey, and it's 9 times out of 10 very humbling. Even like how some of the companies that come on might be more of a, let's say, a service, like, oh, we provide this kind of financial service or this kind of software or this way of getting, medications into the hands of consumers that cuts out the third person. But when you look at the story behind how it happened, it was hard. It was experiencing something painful that can bring you to your knees and then having to overcome that. So I really love when people share that journey so that others can hear it. So much of my motivation for the podcast was I want people who are seeking, because I was one of those seekers. I sought for like 7 years. I was lost for a very long time. And to hear someone telling their story that helps you identify where you are on the map and gives you hope that even though you're on a dark spot on that map, if you keep walking, you're going to get back to the light. You're going to get somewhere new. And I think that those podcast episodes really are meant to generate hope and to have people start thinking creatively, because there's so many different ways you can be involved in the industry for people that feel like maybe clinical medicine is not my jam. look how big and broad veterinary medicine is. I know, Megan, you are a great example of that, and people need that kind of inspiration. So I'd say that's my biggest takeaway from all the podcast guests.
That's excellent. Well, I always like to wrap up with a few final questions to just have some fun and learn a little bit about you. So, do you have a skill or an interest that maybe not a lot of people know about?
This goes back to being a kid and being super weird. Oh, it's almost embarrassing. Like I feel like I get flushed admitting this, but as a kid, I loved building all kinds of like terrariums and aquariums. And I eventually moved, like my favorite project was making outdoor enclosures that were not enclosed. And I remember with my father, I told him I was going to, create this environment with no fences and put in toads and turtles. And my gauge of how good the environment was how long they stayed. And so I'd try and, make it so they'd stay longer and longer because there was nowhere else they'd rather be. And I think about that now and how that's pretty much what I do in veterinary medicine and how weird it is. Like as a little kid that I was so obsessed with that. And I would read field guides and try to understand the ecology and like the temperature of the fish tank. Or if I had a terrarium, there was a warm zone and a cold zone, and just so nerdy. But still to this day, if I had the time, I would be outside doing the same thing in nature that I would do in a vet clinic.
Well, this is a perfect audience to be that type of nerd. So you're good company. And is there anything on your bucket list that you would like to do?
Africa.
Oh,
I'm dying to go. I want to save it for a period of my life where I can stay for quite a while because I think it's one of those places that I want to feel like I live there. Like I want to feel like I'm coming back home to some root, being able to explore a lot of different areas and feel the culture, feel the wildlife. I'm just worried that I might not leave. So I might want to make plans. I'm very attracted to Africa. I've never been. That's big on my bucket list.
it's definitely worth it. I was in Zambia for 2 months. So, yes, it was fantastic. And I would go back in a heartbeat. And finally, what is something you are very grateful for?
My relationships. I think that it's what makes the world go round. And I was that person in vet med who would have said, I work in veterinary medicine because I don't like people. I just want to be around animals. And I am completely reformed now. I think in becoming a therapist, it really helped me see that I didn't like being around humans because I was afraid of them. I didn't really understand them. And now I think I understand them very well, which is that we are all on a journey and we all feel like we're not good enough and we all want for more. It's just like we're having the same experience, but we're not talking about it. And so now to feel that humans and the relationships that I have are by far the most important thing in my life. They bring me the most joy. And I think that they are the things that when I'm at the end of my life looking back will be by far the things I'm most proud of.